Hi, I'm Kirby Allison, back here in London in one of my favorite places with one of my favorite people, Dominic Casey, shoemaker
Kirby.
extraordinaire, and the kind of the resident Kirby Allison shoe historian on this channel.
Exactly.
So, Dominic, thank you for joining us. Of course, it wouldn't be a trip to London without you. And as everyone on this channel has come to learn, you always have something interesting and surprising in store for us, and today is no different.
Exactly. We're going to be revealing great secrets today, Kirby.
That's
Great
right.
secrets will be revealed.
Going down the rabbit hole of shoemaker, history
long boots.
and long boots.
Long boots and the history of long boot making. Yeah. So it's a completely different thing from our shoemaking. You've done a lot of work on shoemaking, but now we're talking about long boots, and that's a whole different story.
Yeah. So this is a continuation of the video that we filmed the last time we were in London.
Yep.
Launching a project to really document the construction of a pair of Wellington boots, which
Yeah.
is a long boot. As you spoke in the last video, bootmaking really is in many ways a different discipline. It's kind of a cousin to shoemaking.
Yep.
It's very similar, but it's also very different. And so we spoke through that. You took measurements, and then that leads us to where we are today, where we get to continue to indulge ourselves.
Exactly.
In just the really fascinating history of bootmaking, which in many ways is endangered. I mean, there's fewer bootmakers than there are shoemakers, and kind of see this process come together. So please.
It's very rare. So let's just recap on what we were talking about last time. This is my latest addition to my vintage collection of boots, Kirby, and it's by one of the great bootmakers, Peels. I guess it's maybe 60 years old, maybe 70 years old. It's classic Wellington boot, really. And it's got everything that we're actually thinking about making for you, really. We've got a calf vamp and a calf heel counter.
Let me back up just one moment.
Yeah.
So in the evolution of boots, just back up and put into context kind of what preceded the Wellington boot, and then what did this evolve from and to?
Really, so this then really came from a classic riding boot, which was a stiff riding boot that people used to obviously wear for riding, but the main principle was that your breeches went inside the riding boot, so you wore your boots outside your breeches.
And breeches, for those watching, are in many ways like plus fours. They were trousers that sat really just above the calf.
The boot. Yeah, exactly.
So they would tuck into the boot, and then the boot was exposed.
Exactly. Yeah. So the boot was on the outside, and usually with classic riding boots, you'd see a little tag just on the inside where you button your breeches onto your boot so that your breeches didn't ride up. Yeah. But Wellington wanted to design a completely different boot, and so he said to his bootmaker Hobie, look, I want to go out in the evening, I'm still going to wear a boot, but I want to go dancing, going to the restaurants, etc. So I wanted something much lighter and more flexible than a classic riding boot. And this is what they actually came up with. So I suppose the main difference is here. So this is treed, it's blocked on a last, but the actual leg itself is actually completely collapsible and soft. So it keeps its shape purely and simply because of the tree has actually set it into this shape. The bottom, the vamp part of the boot and the heel counter is still in that classic calf. So they were very smart boots, and they were designed to have their trousers sitting down on top of the boot. So essentially all you really saw was the actual bottom of the boot, really. Trousers down on the outside with a very soft, flexible leg. So interestingly enough, in terms of pattern and styling, it's very similar to your cowboy boot. There's no seam at the back of the boot. There's no seam at the front of the boot, and the seams run down the inside and down the outside. So it's exactly the same structure as your cowboy boot made by Lee Miller. So this may well be the predecessor of the cowboy boot. So people would have gone to America wearing something very similar to this. Really.
Well, Lee talks about that, how the cowboy boot in many ways was kind of an amalgamation of British bootmaking with Mexican bootmaking, and it kind of evolved kind of as a cross-pollination between those things.
Exactly. So this is what we're intending to make for you. So something, but again, it's got a lot of the classic bespoke shoemaking. The Peels, this was one of the great bootmakers of the time. So we're looking at something unlike perhaps cowboy boots. We've got a beveled waist, which is again hand sewn. We've got quite a small heel sitting on the back, a really nice shaped heel with a crescent front.
And a low heel too.
A low heel. A reasonably low heel, 1 1/8 inch, much similar to maybe slightly higher than your dress shoes. And again, sort of square welted front to it with a leather sole and heel. So the front of the boot is really quite solid. The vamp and the heel counter is solid. It's got stiffener in the toe, stiffener in the back. And the leg is really soft and flexible.
Yeah. And you have a spur box. So, this would have been a boot that a gentleman would have certainly still ridden a horse in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so in the evening, as they would have gone down to their club, etc., they might well be on their horse as well. So, and then classically for a military boot, bearing in mind that this is the boot that officers wear as part of their military dress uniform, they would have wear spurs as part of their dress uniform. So it's still a British military boot as part of the officer's uniform, and they'd be expected to wear spurs.
Yeah. And so this at that time, this dates back to the mid-19th century. So the Duke of Wellington, of course, was a gentleman, and so he would have been just as much at home, with the upper class at balls as he was on the military field, in the middle of a campaign.
Exactly, yeah. So he's a military officer, leader of the British Army, but equally he was quite comfortable with royalty, and he was really the fashion icon of the day. I think that's the important thing, is a lot of men's styling came from military uniforms. Yeah. And so he was the current fashion icon. Yeah. When he came back from defeating Napoleon, he was an international, he was an international star, really.
He really was.
So what he wore in terms of his footwear, transformed footwear forever, really.
So he came back, of course, after the Battle of Waterloo as a superstar.
Yeah,
he was.
Exactly.
And his fashion very much was on the cutting edge. And what's interesting about Wellington, of course, he's kind of the patron saint, if you will, of Kirby Allison. With our canon, really comes from him, and contrasting the Duke of Wellington, say, with Beau Brummel. Beau Brummel was very much a dandy.
Yeah.
He was a fashion icon, but he didn't really do anything other than dress.
Exactly.
Fancy. Whereas the Duke of Wellington was a fashion icon, but he also was the leader of the British military.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So defeated Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo, and this was a man who
he'd been on the battlefield.
Actually got things done.
Yeah.
And the boot, of course, is very much closely linked to him.
Yeah.
It's named after him.
And classically, when he died in his funeral procession, his horse walked along behind his coffin with his boots still sitting in the stirrups, but facing backwards. So even in his funeral procession, his boots were still an important part of a signature of the Duke of Wellington, really. Yeah. So there's a great link between the man and his footwear.
Yeah. Did you visit his home where he passed away in?
Yes. So that's down in Dover.
Okay.
Walmer Castle in Dover. Yes, was where he actually died, and you can actually go into the room where he actually died as well.
And they had a pair of Wellington boots.
They got a pair of Wellington boots there. Yeah, very interesting pair of Wellington boots with spurs and a very low heel, which classically, with a lot of riding boots are actually designed for riding in, not necessarily walking in.
Okay.
So, there's some slight variations in heel heights depending on, how much walking you intend to do in your boots.
Totally different, let's say, bag of worms than a traditional West End dress shoe, which you've done. I'm wearing my beautiful dark brown Dominic Casey Clubland pigskins. Cap toe Oxford. Beautiful shoes. I love them. But you're really
completely different.
So I guess walk us through. We took measurements, and I see that you have a last there.
Yeah.
Talk through about, again, kind of these nuanced differences that are quite significant.
So classically, what we've actually got here, we've got something which has got a closed front to it, Kirby, i.e. there's no way of actually adjusting the width and structure of this boot. So you've just got to pull your foot into it and pull your foot out of it. There's no opening. Yeah. So with your shoes, we've got lacing which allows us to adjust the instep position of your foot. So you can actually get your foot out. If you wanted to actually take your foot out of the shoe when it was laced up, that wasn't possible because the throat's closed up. So, what we actually have to do when we make pull-on boots is we actually have to technically make something quite different. And that's kind of illustrated on these lasts that I bought in, both of which are lasts that we've made for you for different periods. But essentially what we have to do is change the actual instep structure and position of the last.
Okay.
So here, I mean, if you look at this, I mean, to all intents and purposes, they're exactly the same length. They're very similar in widths. What we did was we wanted to change that clubland toe shape to be a slightly more rounded oval toe shape, which is the shape that you would expect on a sort of classic riding boot Wellington. So the lengths are very similar. The toe shapes are slightly different. This is your clubland toe shape here. This is where the real transformation begins to happen. So the instep here is higher and broader than the shoe. But again, this is an important position here because this is the position here, this point here, your instep, which is sitting there on your shoe. Yeah. That's the point which is actually going to hold your foot into the boot.
Okay.
So the three main differences are the height of the instep, the volume of the instep through here. So we can see from your shoe last, it's very slimmed away and cut away through here. To actually get the boot on in the first place, you need to have some fuller measurement here. You need to have some extra height on the last as well. So there's a different height to accommodate your ankle. But then also we actually need to have a much straighter back here than the clipness for your heel on the shoe as well. So what that does is that it gives us the space here to actually allow you to pull your foot into the boot. Yeah. So the whole, apart from, and then this is actually made in 3 pieces rather than the 2 pieces here. Okay. So the front comes off, the back comes out, and then that just leaves the foot. So it makes it easier. Once the boot is made, you've actually got to get the last out, and it can't come out in one piece like that. So it has to come out in a number of pieces. So just to even start off, before we actually even go to make the boots, we need to make a completely different shape on the block here. And then, you know, there's some sort of tricky bits and pieces to do when we come to actually make the patterning of the boot, because we've actually got to get the widths correct here to get your foot in. What that tends to do is it tends to put a lot of extra space through here because we've actually got to get your foot through the boot on the side there. So we've actually got to get some width here on the pattern. So it looks incredibly wide on the pattern, but that's 2-dimensional. But when we actually put it into 3 dimensions, what happens is the actual volume disappears because we put it into a circle. So, I mean, we need to actually get your foot through here. So it's a different type of engineering that goes into the pattern.
And I know that, I mean, again, one of the things unique about you, Dominic, is that, you know, you're really doing all of this, you know, from the last making to the pattern making to the actual making, which in shoemaking is, and really in tailoring for that matter, is really quite rare. You know, for something like this, for the pattern of a Wellington, I mean, how did you learn how to make this? I mean, is it referencing old historical books? Is it reverse engineering these, you know, these vintage samples that you've discovered at flea markets?
Well, exactly. Well, that is exactly how, it's a combination of all of those, really. It's really a combination of all of those. Because there's so few people who now actually make this stuff now, it's very difficult to actually learn it. So I originally learned, maybe I shouldn't almost
no one to
admit to this. There's no one, no one you can call up. Well, I mean, 35 years ago, I learned to make riding boots by buying old vintage boots and taking them apart. And actually dismantling them and then working out how on earth they've been made, looking at the stitching. So I think previously, in the previous video, we had one of the Wellington boots that I'd cut apart and broken up so we could actually look at the internals of it. So that's how I work. There's a combination, there's a couple of old vintage sort of turn of the century shoemaking books, which have got some indications of how to go about making the patterns on them. And you kind of work it out for yourself, really. And a bit of trial and error.
Yeah, well, there we
go. You know, so, I mean, 30 years ago, I made boots that people couldn't put on. I made boots that I couldn't get the last out of. You know, so it has been a bit of trial and error over the years. Well, but it's technically a difficult, these look incredibly simple I mean, they look very elegant when they're on. They look very simple structures, but actually in terms of the engineering and the actual boot making that are done in them, they're much more complicated, really. There's a whole, you've actually got to start to think about getting them on and the whole shape of the leg. So you've moved from just making a last for a foot to actually getting all of this part organised as well, really. So it
is difficult. And
it changes the whole depth of the thing.
And what's different from just a shoemaking, from a shoemaking perspective in terms of how it's actually made up?
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of like techniques or stitching, I mean, I would imagine, it's still hand welted, right? So you're channeling the insole and welting to that.
Exactly.
I mean, it still has a outsole that's, sewn on just like a normal outsole.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe a slightly squarer waist to give the boot structure and support and stability.
Yeah.
I mean, very different kind of nail patterns on this. It's really quite unique.
Exactly. But what you can see is, so obviously from this one, I know it's 60, 70 years old, but it's a really lovely looking boot. Peels were probably one of the great boot makers, really. And again, we've got a beveled channel running through here. You can see the residue of the hand stitches running around there. So that's classically welted. The key difference between the structure that this is made with a German seat. So the back of the split lift is sewn into the back of the boot.
Okay.
Rather than nailed on. Because what the problem, if you were to nail it on, you can't then actually, because you actually can't get inside the boot, you can't actually remove any of the nails that have come up through the insole. So you actually have to make a thing called a German seat, which is a sewn split lift on the back.
Okay.
And then you sew the first layer of the sole on as well. So that's the primary difference. You still got the beveled waist and the beveled welt here, square around the front, but it's got a German sewn seat. The main reason for that is that when to actually pull them off, if you were to put them in the, what you actually have to do is pull down on the heel to actually get them off when they're really tight. And if it was nailed on, after years and years of pulling down on the heel to get the boot off, you just pull the heel off. So by sewing the heel on, it's more secure.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's more secure.
And what about this seam right here on the side? I remember you talking how this is done.
So this is classically, this was a hand sewn seam, and then it's silk. So they've stitched down on either side here. And if you look down on this one, it's got all of the pulls run the full length of the boot. So the pull is actually coming all the way up the boot. And that's just covering this seam up here. And of course, this is, again, a blind seam. There's no stitching between the vamp and the leg of the boot. Really? So it's all stitched internally by hand round the vamp here. So it gives it a very clean, simple look.
And that's just an example of fine shoemaking.
Fine shoemaking, just fine sort of craftsmanship, really. It's just, that's exactly what it is. Exactly.
The finesse with which they did their hand sewing.
Yeah.
Was really something.
Remarkable.
Because now would you machine this?
You can machine them. I think we'll be hand
would it be done like that today, or would you hand stitch it?
Probably hand stitch it. I think we'll hand stitch it. Yeah.
There we go. On
exactly.
Camera.
Yeah, on camera.
As though it's not enough work, right?
Exactly. We'll just make it even more difficult.
Yes.
Why not?
And how much more time would you say that a boot like this takes to make than a West End shoe?
Yeah, these are probably, I would have thought, double the time
really?
In terms of the shoemaking. Yeah, and that's really reflected in the cost of riding boots and long boots, really. Yeah.
Well, if a bespoke shoe, what's the approximate bespoke shoe price?
Someone were £4,000. Let's say $5,000, something like that.
And then a riding boot would be in the ballpark of
$10,000.
And then depending on the maker, could stretch all the way up to 20.
Yeah.
Right?
Quite easily.
The closer you get to the palace,
Yeah, exactly.
The more expensive those boots become.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's an interesting, it's an interesting and rare business now.
Yeah.
To see things like
Well, it's exciting to kind of see this all come together.
So we're going to try something on you. And what I've done is, because it's technically really tricky, we wanted to I've made a mock-up.
Okay.
From the pattern with a very soft leg, but I've actually made it inside out.
Oh, really?
So what I've done is I've put all of the stiffening, which you can't actually see on an actual boot because it's inside, is actually now on the outside, just so that I can begin to check where the stiffeners are going to fit on your heel, where the toe puff's going to fit.
Because the stiffeners are important too in terms of providing that structure.
Exactly. So the stiffeners in the front and the back are really important, especially the heel stiffener at the back, and the shape of the last at the back here is really important for actually holding the whole thing on your foot, really.
Yeah.
So
and this has a seam kind of going down the middle, but that wouldn't be there on the
That's not going to be there. So what we'll be doing is, on the actual ones, we're actually going to be blocking the leather. So we'll actually be taking the seam round away from here. So the difference with the seam running down the front here, what it does, it just allows me to look at the balance between the inside and the outside of your foot. So really this is more important. It's an indication for me and the pattern about identifying the centre line of the last, really. And when we actually make the thing, it won't actually, there's going to be nothing there. But we got the pulls. The pulls normally are sitting on the inside of the boot as well, like that. And after you've pulled them on, they get tucked away inside, so you don't actually see them. But I wanted to just look at the positioning of the pulls, look at the positioning, really see the heights of the pulls, etc., and the width of this on your leg, just so that we can begin to look at getting the balance right and how the whole thing is actually going to sit on your leg and look.
And fittings, and especially trials like this, are really traditionally quite rare. I mean, it wasn't until like the 1970s and 80s that you really saw it kind of come in to being done. But I've never seen anything like this where, you've actually got, some of these internal elements placed on the outside so that you can see them. Is this?
I mean, it just really helps.
Have you seen this done before?
No, I know, but it really helps me actually think about the heights of the, because this is really important.
Of course.
Because there's a lot of seams meet on your ankle position right here. So you just got to understand where the structure of everything, it just really helps you visualize internally what's actually going to, externally, what's actually happening internally. So it's just on this type of making, it's an important thing to actually really understand, really. So that's why I just made it like that, just more importantly, so I can see how this is ultimately, this is going to have to hold you in the back. This line is an important line in terms of the structure of the pattern and stuff like that. So it's really, and in terms of the aesthetics, this line runs straight down to just in front of the heel here. So I've really got to make sure that this is running straight down. Sometimes if you see some riding boots, they've kind of really missed the aesthetics of how the whole thing works. They're sort of, the angles don't look quite right.
To the well-trained eye.
So the well-trained. So I really want to make sure that, from by having the seams on the outside, I can actually really look at where the seams are sitting in the positioning.
Well, shall we try them on?
So what we need to do is really just slide them onto your foot and see exactly how they're going to fit on your foot. So much the same shape as your shoe last, just slightly broader through the toe here. This is this very clubland straight side. This is a slightly more rounder. I still think it's a really nice, elegant shape that we've got running on here, Kirby, but it's just a slightly rounder, slightly fuller looking shape. So let's get you into which one do you want to go first, left or right?
Let's do the right or left. And I'll roll these up just so that we can
perfect.
See what's going on.
So fingers on the pulls. Pull. So probably, I would say, a bit too easy to put them on. I don't really want to see that. So that's probably telling me that there's a bit too much, on the top of your instep, on the top of the last, just here, there's just a bit too much height here.
And could this go back farther?
Yeah, this all needs to actually drop back across here. And when it's blocked, it will actually sit at a different angle. It's the seam here is throwing it much straighter. When it's got blocked, it's actually going to sit back on your instep a bit more like that. But really, without getting this point really snug here, it's a bit too loose. It's almost maybe a good quarter of an inch too loose through here, Kirby. And what that's doing, the height is just not quite correct on this part of the last here. So we're going to have to drop this down and clip it through here. The toe looks pretty good. The toe puff is going to be sitting in a good position here. This seam looks fine. But I think let's get you into the other one, because I think they're also looking. There's a couple of other things. While we're here, it's probably just, now we don't want to make it really drum tight on your leg, but I think what we'll be doing is we'll be looking at taking maybe 1/2 inch out of the top here, Kirby, and dropping all of this line
back.
So on this part of the pattern, we're gonna take out something out of the top here and drop all of this front back here.
Yeah.
Okay. And what that will do is we'll keep the back similar, but it will make it harder to pull it on. So we're going to tighten the front here. This is, we don't want to make it drum tight. We're not going to make it like that on your leg, because what that does is if it's too tight on your leg, it drives all of the boot down like that when you walk. So we actually need to just have some movement just so it actually holds up and doesn't actually interrupt with that. So there's a couple of things that we need to do, and we need to just shorten and clip the back as well. There's a bit too much space running through. Let's just pop your trousers down on that. You'll get some sense of how that's it. So you can see that when your trousers are down, it's going to, I know it looks a bit ridiculous with the toe puff actually on the outside, but you'll get some
setting
idea.
Your trends.
Yeah, we won't be. Pull away. Oh, yeah. Again, probably, I think, again, too easy to put that on. You know, the old boys always used to say that if you don't spend 10 minutes putting your boots on, they're too loose. So I don't think we're ever going to get you spending 10 minutes putting your boots on.
How do you get them off then?
Well, exactly. You need to, well, they always had manservants to get them off. They always had butlers.
I need to train Bianca as
this? Bianca, Sorry, Bianca, you're going to have to pull my boots off in the evening. But so, again, so I suspect that we're slightly too full all the way through here on the instep, and there's too much volume through here. So we're going to take some off the instep there, clip that through there. Let me just check the top of the leg. And again, the same here, Kirby. We're going to pinch out a good 1/2 inch out of the top there and drop all of this line back. We're going to drop all of this back here and tighten it through there. And that, I'm afraid, will make it stiffer to get on, but it's going to clip you then. And the other thing that we're going to do is I need to have more clip in the back of the heel. The heel's moving about far too much. So I think, Kirby, if you were just to stand up for a moment, if you don't mind, so I think what you can see is that when your trousers are going to be down, they're just going to look like, really, all you're going to see is just a sort of a very elegant front to the boot, really. But there's a number of things which I just need to think about. These were the original drawings that we took when you came down to Eastbourne.
And what's the date on it? Is it the date written?
Oh, gosh, no, I can't remember. That must have been about 6 years ago.
Gosh,
I should think.
ago.
6 years, a long time.
It's been a lot of fun since then.
As you know, exactly, you've done a lot of marathon running. You've had a good few dinners since then. But remarkably and rather joyously, your foot hasn't really changed in dimensions at all. But I think what we need to do, so what we're going to do is we're going to drop this area back here. So we're going to reduce that in height. We're going to slim it down through the side. So it's called really adjusting the cone. And what that's going to do is pinch this bit and slim it down through here. Through the pattern making, what we're going to do is we're going to adjust. I'm not really happy with the straight line here. I'm just going to move this straight line running down the seam because it's not quite in the right place. And then we're going to shift the front of the boot backwards. So we're going to take all of this backwards here and take some out of the front here, which is going to make it more difficult for you to pull on, but it's actually going to hold your foot through here much better. So we're going to pinch some out, height out of here, volume on the side there and there and there. And then the final thing is, what we're going to do is we're going to pinch some out of the back here, just going to shorten the length, probably half a size, and straighten up this back, take out some of this bowing from the back of the last here. So those are the main adjustments we're going to do, and we're just going to do on the right one, we're also just going to adjust. I'm just going to refine the shape of the last at the front there.
Okay.
So I think all of those, and then what we'll do is we'll move forward and actually make the whole upper of the Wellington boots. So we'll make all of the upper and we'll fit them in welt next time so we can actually test the trying on and the pulling on just before we put the soles and heels on, just to make sure everything is okay beforehand.
Yeah. Beautiful boot.
Calf front. So this is the really soft, this is the Moroccan goat skin.
Yeah.
Which is going to make the leg. So this part here is all made from a goat skin. So we've got calf in the front.
And how is it blocked? I mean, how does it made to stand up? Is that done through the shoe tree? Or?
Just done with the tree, really, Kirby. So that is just really... Once we've actually made the boot, Kirby, we'll actually then block the leg to actually give you the shape. This is a classic Wellington boot tree. So it gives you all of the shaping here. You can see the instep from the last here, the toe. And then this is the actual, the sort of the heel part of the leg going in there. So this is what we'll use to actually give you the shaping of the boot. And then once it then goes from being something soft and you just then keep it on the trees and it keeps it in that shape, even though it's a very soft structure. Collapsible structure. So it helps keep the shape.
Yeah, what about this right here? I mean, I'm just noticing, you know, kind of on the vamp of the shoe.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, even this feels like it has more structure than a normal West End shoe.
Yeah. So it's got, I think it's got quite heavy, the calf skin tends to be slightly heavier.
Okay.
So maybe 1.8 millimeter for the calf skin and then quite a heavy lining.
Okay.
What you've actually got inside here, this is, the bottom of the shoe is lined and you use a heavier lining here, which gives you more substance, structure on the
and so there's more structure all around.
Round the front, yeah. Less structure on the top because it's got no lining, but as soon as you actually get down past this vamp line here,
but just comparing
you've got
it to
more
like a West End dress shoe, like, you know, like this shoe right here.
Yeah.
And this is,
very
this
soft.
Is really soft.
Yeah.
Right, whereas this is quite stiff.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And that comes down to just, again, the construction. And then we'll do it as effectively a hole cut, right? So there will be no cap, even though visually, you know, right here, you know, we have a cap.
Yeah.
But that'll be underneath.
That'll be underneath
piece
here.
Of leather.
Exactly. So that is actually sitting underneath there. The toe cap is sitting underneath here. What this allows me to do is to just check where you're actually flexing your foot there to actually make sure you don't want to make it too long so it starts to cut into your big toe joint, but you need to get the length correct so that it allows your foot to flex and actually hold the cap. So really what we'll be doing is holding this cap shape underneath the boot.
Underneath the boot.
Yeah.
So that I can get that beautiful high shine mirror glass.
Exactly. You know. So we wouldn't want you to not be able to do that, would we?
That's right. Well, Dominic, this is very exciting.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, so you'll go back and make these adjustments and then actually, you know,
and then what we'll do is we'll make up one of this. We'll use the goat skin. We'll get some black calf skin. We'll make this up to a fitting again. So like we did with your shoes, it'll be in welt. And we'll stitch the German seat on it as well, just so that we can take a look at how the seat's going to hold the sole on. And we'll try it on again.
Yeah. Okay.
And we'll look at the main things that we'll be looking for was holding you better across the front and better through the heel.
Yeah. And at that point, you know, it's like 3/4 finished.
It's nearly finished then. To all intents and purposes, then once you've got that bit right, you've really cracked the main points, really. Then putting the sole and heel on, once the German seat on, is very similar to just any other type of shoemaking. So that's relatively quick and relatively mechanistic once we've actually got all of the other engineering out of the way.
And what does it allow you to do? I mean, what flexibility does that allow, having it in welt, but still pretty much completed, that you wouldn't have if the outsole was sewn on?
Well, it just allows, if there is still any issues with the instep or the volumes, it allows me just to unsew it and just make some adjustments to the last.
So you would unsew the welt?
Yeah, just take the welt off. But probably, if there's nothing wrong with the heel, wouldn't take the German seat off. Let's just surmise, pretend there's something wrong with the instep here, might just unstitch the welt across this waist here, readjust the last, re-last the boot, and then just sew the welt back in. So what it does, it gives you some flexibility to make some adjustments.
So it does allow you to do things that if it was a finished shoe with the outsole that you wouldn't be able to do without removing
you'd
the
have
outsole.
to take exactly. So you'd have to take all of the, in effect, you'd have to take it all off. Remake it. So what it does is it gives you some flexibility to make some adjustments.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Well, Dominic, this is exciting. So I think you'll work on this, and we're going to try to film as much of that actual making process as possible,
Yep.
which should be exciting, and then have you back in Texas, hopefully, or maybe
Great.
in London, to try those on.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We look forward to it.
Dominic, pleasure is always mine. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Always fun,
Yeah,
Kirby.
exciting
Always
project.
fun. Thank you.
Yeah.